auf Deutsch. I'd like to welcome you. Very appreciative that you're all here attending this program. Prabhu, could you switch this one off? It's quite warm.
Okay. This word is
Yeah? Okay.
okay.
Okay. Good.
And this is quite warm, you are right. But now I make it ice cold.
Fantastic. So again, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I've been invited very kindly by our guest temple president from Kareshwara Prabhu, and he's invited me to speak about a topic which is extremely important, especially in today's world. And that's the relation between religion, spirituality, and science. Oftentimes, religion, spirituality are put into opposition to science. If you're a scientist, if you're a rational thinking person, if you're a logically thinking person, if you're educated in science, physics, biology, cosmology, then there's no way that you can believe in the existence of God. On the other hand, what I'm proposing here is not that I'm asking you to believe something. Of course, we all believe things. You know, belief is a normal part of life. We believe that tonight the sun is going to set. We believe that tomorrow morning it's going to rise again. That's a belief. There's no hard scientific evidence, and there's no guarantee, let me put it this way. There is scientific evidence because for the last thousands of years, we have seen the sun setting and rising, setting and rising. So there's scientific evidence, but there is no guarantee that it will happen again tonight and tomorrow. So there's always that uncertainty. So that's a belief. However, it is a belief based on solid facts. Science is a belief which is based on solid facts. It's still a belief. You know, this is called in philosophy, it's called the inductive principle. Inductive principle means that if you have many past experiences, and these experiences, they repeat themselves, like for instance, the law of gravity, every time we take something, we drop it, it will fall to the ground, right? That happens all the time, and it happens for thousands and thousands of years. It's not certain that it will happen again next 5 minutes or tomorrow or the week after. Again, it's a belief, but it's a belief that's based on a lot of hard scientific evidence. This is called inductive knowledge. So we must understand that all scientific knowledge fundamentally is inductive knowledge. It's based on past experiences, and from these past experiences we deduce there are certain laws, certain regularities, and that makes us understand that the universe is a machine, very complex machine, and that we can count on that machine, that as it acted in the past, it will continue to act this way in the future. But it's not 100% guaranteed, so we must keep that in mind. The point is that the recent developments in science of the last 100 years, but I would say particularly the last 40 years, are quite revolutionary. And I'm not saying that as an overstatement to say something sensational or, you know, create some whatever. It's really true. The developments over the last 30 to 40 years are truly revolutionary in terms of the scientific conclusions about our universe. And let me try to summarize. What are these scientific conclusions that are so revolutionary and that are so spectacular? It's the discovery of what scientists and philosophers today call that the universe is cosmically fine-tuned. It's called the fine-tuned universe. And the essence of the fine-tuning concept is that scientists have discovered over the last 100 years that there are only 4 forces in the universe. 4 forces that rule everything. That's gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. These 4 forces rule everything that happens in the universe. From us sitting here, me being able to talk, you being able to sit there and listen, the planet Earth orbiting the sun shining, putting out all of its energy second after second after second. The galaxy existing, the Milky Way, then there's other galaxies there existing, they are rotating around them. All of these things are happening because the universe is exactly fine-tuned in such a way that matter can even exist at all. Now, what do I mean with that? We know that matter is composed of atoms. We also now know that atoms are not the ultimate particle. There are subatomic particles. And this was already discovered in the beginning of the 20th century, that an atom can be split. And then they discovered that the nucleus consists of a proton, neutron, and an electron which is orbiting. Later discoveries pointed out that even those particles are not fundamental, that there are even smaller particles, quarks, and there are all kinds of quarks, with different flavors and different colors. And these quarks, together with all the other particles, make up what we call the particle universe. And in the end, scientists realize, and this is a development that took place in the 1920s of the previous century, that even those fundamental particles are not even really particles. Scientists discovered that particles can sometimes appear as a particle, and sometimes they can appear as a wave. Therefore, they call them wavicles. Very creative. Even scientists can be creative. So the creativity is that they recognize that here is a fundamental paradox. A particle that is simultaneously a wave. Now, what's the difference between a particle and a wave? A particle is on one specific location in a defined location. The wave is everywhere. So this is a contradiction. How can be something simultaneously in one location and simultaneously be everywhere? Yet, this is something that scientists have discovered, that this is really the case. So, the recognition that the universe is ruled by these 4 forces, and the one that I just talked about is the nuclear force. So we have gravity. We all know what gravity is. Something falls to the ground. It's masses, they attract one another. This was discovered by Isaac Newton. Then there is electromagnetism. Electromagnetism was discovered at the end of the 19th century by a scientist called Maxwell, and he formulated his laws, the laws of Maxwell. Then there is the strong nuclear force, which is the force, and we just discussed how these atoms are not just hard balls, but they in fact can be split into smaller particles. But these particles, they have very specific properties. The protons and the neutrons, the proton is an positive charge, the electron is a negative charge. They attract one another, but still the whole thing is balanced. And the atom keeps existing in a very stable way. Sometimes they mutate into a different element, or they can change because of forces that are acted on them. But it's very stable structure. Now, within the nucleus, it's even more remarkable because the nucleus is very, very small. If you take an atom, which is already incredibly small, we cannot see it with the naked eye, we cannot even see it with microscopes. If you blow the atom up to the size of the Vatican dome, which is a huge dome, so that's the contour of the atom, then the nucleus is a tiny speck of dust, a piece, a grain of salt or a grain of sand in the middle of that dome. That's how small the nucleus is. But this nucleus is packed with energy. It's packed with protons and neutrons that are held together by a force. It's called the strong nuclear force. It's one of the most important forces in the universe. For a very small, short distance, whereas gravity can act over millions and millions of kilometers. The strong nuclear force is only acting over a very short distance. The distance that I just talked about is the grain of sand in the middle of the Vatican dome, being the size of an atom. So, but that force is incredibly strong. And that force is, in fact, what we know today. It's the basis of what we call nuclear energy. Because when that nucleus merges with another nucleus, which happens, for instance, when there is nuclear fusion, when hydrogen atoms fuse together, create a helium atom. The helium atom has slightly less mass, about, I think it's 0.7%. And that mass is then converted into energy according to Einstein's formula, E is mc squared. E is mc squared, it's the most famous formula, it's the mother of all equations, the mother of all formulas. It's an incredible brain kind of inspiration on the part of Albert Einstein. E means energy, M means mass, and C squared. C is the speed of light, which is 300,000 kilometers per second, and squared. So you can understand that the amount of energy that goes into mass is massive, literally. And that's why you have a nuclear bomb. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was only 60 kilograms of uranium. You can hold it, you can carry it. That bomb was able to destroy an entire city. So there's an incredible power in it. There's another force. It's called the weak nuclear force. The weak nuclear force is less important. It causes radioactive decay that allows elements to mutate with one another. So these four forces, all of them playing their role on the cosmic stage. Gravity keeps us on the Earth. If there were no gravity, we'd all be flying off in space. The Earth is spinning around at an incredible speed. And because of the centrifugal force, we would all be launched into space like missiles. It doesn't happen. We're solidly fixed to the ground because of gravity. Electromagnetism creates light. It creates radiation. It also rules the chemical interactions between elements. The nuclear force, the strong one I just explained, and there's the weak nuclear force, which is less important, plays a minor role, but still incredibly important. These four forces together, they control everything that happens in the universe. Now, what is the discovery? Well, what makes that, of course, in itself, that's a special thing, because a few hundred years ago, nobody knew about this. So this is only very recent discovery that scientists have found out that the universe is structured in this way. But what is the special thing? I started talking about this cosmic fine-tuning. Okay, what is this fine-tuning? The fine-tuning is that scientists have discovered that the four forces, they have values. Gravity has a certain value. Electromagnetism has a certain value. The strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, they all have values. But what they found out that these values are exactly the right values for even an atom to be able to exist in the first place. And if any of these forces would only deviate with a percentage or a fraction of a percentage from one another, atoms could not exist. As a result, the universe could not exist. Or the universe would immediately after the Big Bang turn into a black hole. Or it would explode, for it to expand forever into nothingness. These four forces are precisely fine-tuned so that the universe, from the smallest particle, the smallest subatomic particle, even from the quantum field itself, and I'll come to that in a minute, till massive galaxies, clusters of galaxies. All of these things are made possible because of this fine-tuning of these four forces. Now, you can ask the question, how did that happen, that fine-tuning? Maybe it happened by coincidence. Maybe at a certain point the universe came into being, then, after trying different values, at a certain point they settled for the value that works. But it didn't work that way. It was the other way around. When the universe was created, and according to scientists today, and we can accept that pretty much as a fact, the universe created through what is called the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago. These four forces they had to be in place even before the Big Bang started. Or as scientists call it, it's the first billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second at the time of the Big Bang. So these forces had to be there already in place, done, complete, perfect, no chance of trying something else. No chance of evolution, for instance. And some people think that. Yeah, that the universe is kind of this thing that's filled with matter and energy. And then there is the void, of course, infinite void. We cannot imagine a universe where space would be limited, because you would immediately ask the question, okay, if there's a limitation, then what's beyond the limitation? Ah, more space. So space is basically everywhere and it is infinite. So that infinite void filled with atoms, they are interacting. And this is in what is called, in philosophical terms, it's called pluralism. The universe is a pluralistic, according to that point of view, the universe is a pluralistic system. It's made of many different parts. They reside in the void. They are disconnected from one another. They may bump into one another, but they are fundamentally disconnected. And they move around randomly. Now, the thought is that if they keep moving around randomly for millions and billions of years, and assuming, as some scientists have assumed, that the universe is eternal, that in that eternality, when these atoms are bumping around, something workable would come out of it, something structure, some structure that is working and that's stable, upon which you can build bigger structures. For instance, to give you just an idea, this human body is made of 80 trillion cells. 80 trillion. That is 8 million billion. So, I mean, it's a huge number. 80 trillion. That's how many cells we have in our body. Each cell is more complex than an entire city. If you take the city of Cologne and you add up all the bricks, stones, woodwork, lamp posts, roofs, traffic lights, all, you know, from the smallest to the biggest part, you add them all up. These parts all combined is not as complex as one single cell with DNA in it. So we're dealing with an incredible level of complexity, an incredible level of complexity. So it is assumed that that level of complexity could have evolved through an evolutionary process over billions and billions of years. You know, there is the example that was put forward by a scientist, and he used the example, you may have heard it. If you take an infinite amount of monkeys with an infinite amount of typewriters, and you let these monkeys type on those typewriters for eternity, then eventually, by accident, they will produce all the works of Shakespeare. This is the idea. So they tried it. They did computer simulations. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for complex reasons. And it's a little too much to go into the detail why it doesn't work. But it doesn't work. So even if you take every atom in the universe and you turn that atom into a monkey with a typewriter, even if they keep on typing for eternity, they will never ever produce the works of Shakespeare. So why is that? It's complexity. Complexity, complexity, complexity. Organized complexity. And the bewildering thing is that that organized complexity did not emerge after billions of years of evolution and trying, atoms bumping around in empty space. No. We first of all know that the universe was created, so it's not eternal. The universe in this form is not eternal. It was created through a Big Bang, as scientists now believe, about 13.7 billion years ago. And these forces had to be there at the beginning. They did not have time to try to evolve into something complex and something that works. I mean, this is reminiscent of the theory of Darwin. We all know Darwin, of course. That Darwin is the one who came up with this idea that life was created through evolutionary process. Darwin published his book in 1859 on the origin of the species. And he created a revolution because all of a sudden, God was no longer needed because life forms could now be explained despite all their complexity, despite the 18 trillion cells, although Darwin had no idea how cells work. He knew there were cells, but he didn't know DNA existed. He didn't know anything about molecular biology, but you know, he was convincing at the time. He said, "Ah, this whole thing happened by evolutionary processes, which is basically the same thing that I was talking about. Cells trying different things, try this, try that, it doesn't work, that works. You evolve from one cell to a multicellular organism that becomes more effective in surviving, and then the multicellular organism becomes even more effective in surviving, and eventually we have human beings, and because we are smart, we have a brain, we become the most successful species of animals because we basically dominate all the other species, right? So it's a matter of survival of the fittest. We've all heard this term. But the point is that the complexity of living organisms is such that even just this idea of an evolutionary process taking place, whereby from basically chaos, when some molecules interacting, turning into the first living cell, and then eventually evolving into a multicellular, highly sophisticated organism with 80 trillion cells. Even that process is completely impossible, even within the time frame of the existence of this universe. Scientists have calculated the chance that by accident, cells would be created, would be 10 to the minus 40,000. 10 to the minus 40,000. I mean, that's a number that is so incredibly huge. You can't even spell it out, you can hardly pronounce it. The chance of that happening is 10 to the minus 40,000. In fact, within the lifetime of this universe, and the universe is, as I said, 13.7 billion years ago, the Earth was only created about 4 billion years ago. So within 4 billion years, that kind of evolution should have taken place. No, it could not have taken place because it's statistically impossible. Now, going back to the origin of the universe itself, we don't even have the luxury of talking about evolution because, as I said, all these forces were already there at the beginning of the Big Bang explosion when the universe was created. So this idea of evolution that was then successfully launched by Darwin in 1859, which changed the world, and everybody thought, wow, we don't need God anymore. We now have an explanation how life came about. Because life is, after all, of all the complex things we find in the universe, life is the most incredibly intricately complex. You know, and not only that it's complex, but it works. We are human beings. We have consciousness. We can talk about it. We can investigate. We can investigate ourselves. So life is therefore very, very special. And therefore it's very natural that this could appeal to people, that life could be explained in terms of an evolutionary process that happened purely by accident. It's very attractive. If you're an atheist, you think, wow, this is fantastic. You know, Richard Dawkins, who is one of the greatest proponents of atheism in the modern day, he wrote this book, The God Delusion. He said Darwin made it possible for us to be an intellectually satisfied atheist. He's given us the framework that if we embrace this framework, we can accept, yeah, now I can believe in the non-existence of God and be intellectually satisfied with that explanation. Because up until then, there was a big problem. You know, the principle of design, it's called teleology in philosophy. This was already propounded by Aristotle, who came up with the term teleology. That means that things have a certain purpose. And therefore, when you design an instrument, that instrument has a certain purpose. And when you have a telephone, you can call it, or nowadays with a smartphone, you can do everything with it. But it has a certain purpose. It's designed for that purpose. A car is designed for a purpose. So we can see that human beings and life forms, plants, animals, they all have a purpose. The tiger is very good at hunting. A human being is smart. He can create science. You know, there's an antelope that can run really fast. So we can see that they're all designed for a certain purpose. So life was always the exception, because the idea of atheism, that there is no God, has been around for thousands of years. But life forms was always preventing that from breaking through as an explanation, because life was so obviously complex, so obviously highly organized, and so obviously designed that the thought of it happening by accident just was impossible. But Darwin made it possible through his idea that evolution, you start with something very simple, and that something very simple becomes a little more complex, and that something more complex becomes even more complex. Same thing, but it doesn't work. It's wrong. It's a fallacy. So, in fact, the reason why it's a fallacy, because life itself is made out of atoms and molecules. And as we just discussed, these atoms and molecules, they were created at the time of the Big Bang, not by accident. They were designed. They were created in a purposeful matter. And this is baffling scientists. And that's why I'm coming back to this point, that this is a revolution. Scientists have never before in history had real empirical evidence that can prove that the universe did not come about by chance. That in fact, chance is an impossibility. That's why my book is called Intelligence or Chaos, because these are the only two explanations for the origin of the universe. How did the universe come about? Either it was designed or it came about by chance. It's only two options. There's nothing in between. Now, if the chance option is impossible, then the alternative, by elimination, the only alternative that's left, there must have been information, intelligence, and consciousness behind the creation of the universe. To point it down to mathematics, mathematicians have calculated the chance of this happening by chance. One famous mathematician, Roger Penrose, he calculated that the chance that the universe would have emerged exactly with these four forces and the values of these four forces in perfect relationship to one another, the chance of that happening is 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. So that's a 10 with 123 zeros behind it. If you write out this number, it would fill up most of the visible universe. Just the physical writing it out on a piece of paper would fill up most of the universe. That's how incredibly large that number is. Now, according to probabilistic mathematics, if something has a chance of 10 to the power minus 50, and if it's smaller than 10 to the power minus 50, then the possibility or probability turns into an impossibility. It's a turning point. That is the turning point, 10 to the power minus 50. This statement was made by a mathematician, a French mathematician, Mr. Borel, in the beginning of the 20th century. And he stated that anything that is less probable than 10 to the power minus 50 becomes impossible. Here we're talking about 10 to the power 10 to the power 123, which is massively, massively larger than the 10 to the power 50. So,
one question, sorry, this minus 50 and that is plus 10, plus 10, plus
10 to the power minus 50.
The other one is minus or
10, yeah, in also, but the 10 to the power 10 to the power 123.
That is also in minus.
Yeah, also in minus.
Yeah.
So this is a factual proof. If one option is impossible, then the other option must be true. So what does it mean? It means that the universe was created by information, intelligence, and consciousness. And that is exactly, and this is the beauty, and that's why we are here, because this Krishna consciousness movement, it's 5,000 years old. It's based on the Vedic literatures and the Vedanta philosophy. The Vedanta philosophy explains exactly that. According to the Vedanta philosophy, the universe was a transformation of energy called Brahman in Sanskrit. That energy is highly intelligent. It's made of pure consciousness. Now, this is a bit of a dilemma because, and I mentioned a little bit about quantum physics, and we've heard this term. Quantum physics was discovered in the 1920s, the previous century. According to quantum physics, it's a similar idea that the universe is basically a huge energy field. Everything is energy. There's no place where there's no energy. There's no empty space. Everything is filled with energy. And that energy is called the quantum field. That energy, that quantum field contains all potential and actual possibilities, all potential and actual forces, all potential and actual attributes. Everything is in there. The only problem that the quantum physicists have not explained, and quantum physics was invented here in Germany. The German scientists like Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, the Danish Niels Bohr, Danish scientist, Schrödinger, another, I think he was Austrian, but basically came from this region of the world. I mean, it's a revolutionary invention, quantum physics. It's a revolutionary invention. The only thing they did not think about, well, they probably thought about it, but they had no solution for it, is that quantum field, is it smart or is it dumb? That's essential. Because if it's dumb, we're stuck with the same problem. Then it won't work. It has to be smart. Similarly, the Big Bang, the question can be asked, was the Big Bang just a dumb explosion, a stupid explosion that's creating a big mess? Or was it a highly sophisticated, organized, intelligent process of creation, which it is? And we find that, of course, in the Vedic literatures. They talk about how Krishna, God, created the universe. Very complex process and an incredible story, but it was created purposefully by a conscious, intelligent mind, the mind of God. So this is the real question that scientists have not yet answered because they're afraid to answer it. Because if you say, yeah, it's intelligent, okay, so you can't be an atheist anymore. Because if it's intelligent, that means that is exactly the definition of God. According to the Vedas, God is defined by three crucial attributes: Sat, Chit, Ananda. You must have heard this. It's a very popularized phrase coming from India. It became popularized in the 1960s when all the gurus came over from India to the West and preaching their knowledge of Vedanta philosophy. And Sat Chit Ananda basically means, Sat means eternal existence, Chit means infinite knowledge and consciousness, and Ananda means infinite eternal bliss. So these are the qualities of God, Sat Chit Ananda. So that is what the conclusion is in terms of the realization of quantum physics, that this is this quantum field. This quantum field must be, if it's, must be smart, it must be intelligent, therefore it has these attributes. It's eternal, it is full of intelligence. Now the bliss part is a different story. You know, scientists will never talk about bliss because that's purely an emotional thing, and but bliss is really important. In fact, according to Vedanta philosophy, bliss is the ultimate purpose of existence. Because what is the purpose of existing if it's miserable? Nobody wants to be miserable. Our conscious nature is, we are also a conscious being. We are part of that, let's say, quantum field of pure consciousness. We want to be blissful. So Ananda is the ultimate purpose. So Sat means you can exist. Chit means you have knowledge of your existence, and Ananda is you can enjoy that existence. So that is God. God is the supreme enjoyer. He's the supreme knowledgeable. He's the supreme existing entity. And we are all expansions of God. So this is, as I said before, truly revolutionary. Never in science did we have such hard evidence that the universe must have been created by a smart, intelligent agent. And you may give it any name. I even, when I talk to people that are kind of atheistic inclined or agnostic, I say, don't mention the word God. Just call it intelligence, just call it information, just call it consciousness. It doesn't matter. What is important is the properties that it has. When we talk about God, it's a sometimes very confusing term. Somebody like Spinoza, for instance, a famous philosopher, but he thought that God meant nature. So he said that God equates nature. So the natural world, nature, that is God. So he was not an atheist because he did not say God does not exist. He said, yeah, God exists, but it's nature. Yeah, but then what is nature? Where did nature come from? Nature didn't create itself. The universe didn't create itself. It came from somewhere else. Uh, and this is the whole point. The Big Bang was not something that self-created itself. The Big Bang is something that came out of another entity, which is called the singularity. And the singularity came from, well, and this is an interesting discussion. As some scientists would say, the singularity came out of nothingness, pure nothingness. This is not our point of view. The singularity came out of fullness. The singularity came from God himself. God is the singularity. Because again, that singularity also has to be smart. It has to be intelligent and it has to be full of consciousness so that it's able to create this universe. So this,
Prabhu,
yes.
sorry, as an excuse me, as one other question. So I do believe that the Big Bang was as in real, no? That
Yeah.
So the universe is coming from a Big Bang.
From the Big Bang.
For 14 as in a billion.
13.7 billion years ago.
But as in, what's about the creation of Lord Brahma? For I don't know.
No. Okay. No. In order to get not to get confused, that doesn't mean that we don't deny the Big Bang, but the Big Bang is just a word. You know, some scientists now they call it was not a Big Bang; it was an inflation, massive inflation. We simply call it creation. You know, and that's what Krishna has done. Krishna created the universe. Now, the process of creation, how did he technically do it? That's really beyond our imagination. I mean, how do you know, if you try to look at the smartphone, how did somebody create that? That's a man-made thing, so we can understand that it was created by somebody, so it was put together. But if you really look at the complexity of the thing, it's incredibly complex. For me as a layman, not a technician, it's an amazing thing. So the fact that the universe was created at a certain point, and that some people will call it the Big Bang, some people call it a massive inflation, some people have other names for it, but the point is it was created. And before the creation, it did not exist, not in its present form. So we don't deny the Big Bang. And basically, we don't deny any of the scientific facts. We simply put the scientific facts in a different order, so to make them more sensible. If you're talking about a creation, but you say that the creator is dumb, if you're talking about the quantum field, and you say the quantum field is unintelligent, that doesn't make any sense. There has to be more than that. So the Vedic paradigm, the Vedic point of view, actually completes the scientific structure. So we are not against science, because a lot of scientific things that have been invented are incredible, and they are true. Gravity exists, electromagnetism exists, nuclear power exists. And this is an important thing. In the 1930s, when scientists were working on the nuclear bomb, many believed, even Einstein, that's impossible. Even though Einstein invented the ES-mc square formula, stating that in principle, a tiny little atom contains a massive amount of energy that could lead to an explosion. So during the 1930s, in the, say, the run-up to World War II, scientists all over the world, the German scientists, American scientists, Japanese scientists, they were working hard to try to use that formula of Einstein to turn it into a military weapon. Fortunately, I think for all of us and for humankind, the Americans at that time, in those days, were the good guys. Today, we don't know anymore. In those days, were the good guys. They invented the nuclear weapon, and they used it to end the war. I mean, it was still horrible, and in a way, it should never have happened, but it did happen, because that war was so insane, that World War II was so crazy, it had to be stopped. So they stopped it, but scientists were working on it. But many scientists didn't believe it could work, yet they persisted. Einstein in 1939, he had emigrated to the United States because he fled Germany because of the persecution of the Jews. And Einstein was Jewish, of course. So he wrote a letter to President Roosevelt, and he said, German scientists, particularly Werner Heisenberg, are working on building a nuclear bomb. And I want the Americans to have the bomb first and not the Germans. So Roosevelt took it very serious. And in 1941, he started the Manhattan Project that eventually led to the building of a nuclear weapon in 1945, and that was successfully tested and then used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. So, but many scientists did not believe it could actually happen. So it shows the incredible level of complexity that we are dealing with and the difficulty in trying to penetrate through scientific research into the structure of the universe and how it's all working. And all of this complexity is just mind baffling. Yet they succeeded in doing it. So the bottom line is that the complexity of the universe, all the forces in it, and all the things that we, including life, can only be explained when it's understood that there is an intelligent, conscious agent that created it. There is simply no alternative. And the Christian conscious philosophy is, as I said, it's trying to complete the scientific structure. We don't reject science. We don't fundamentally disagree with many of their findings.
Yes, we do. Because of the Prabhupada told us that Darwin is a rascal, and he has no ideas in what he's.
Yeah, Darwin we disagree with. It's true. Yeah. We don't agree with all of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes scientists are wrong, and Darwin was wrong. But that doesn't mean they're all wrong. There's a lot of things in science that do work. As I said, the atomic bomb worked. Our smartphone works. Our telecommunication systems work. Our cars, airplanes, they work. They all work. And it's all based on scientific knowledge and scientific research and scientific investigation. So my point is this. This Krishna consciousness movement is not anti-rational. It is not against science. In fact, we are incorporating science into our worldview. Whenever that science is actually correct science, and of course he's right. You know, we don't agree with Darwin. Scientists make mistakes. It doesn't mean they always make mistakes, and doesn't mean everything they say is a mistake. But sometimes they make mistakes. We learn from that. They learn from that, hopefully. But the Krishna conscious philosophy is able to, and I use the example always, and I find it a very good example. It's like, don't expect Vedic philosophy to be able to teach you how to change the tire of your car. You won't find that in the Bhagavad Gita or on the Srimad Bhagavatam or any of the other Vedic literatures, or how to build an airplane, or maybe through some mystic power possibly, but not the kind of airplanes that we have today. So the Vedas give us the total picture. It's the framework, the total picture. So you have the helicopter view of the universe. And it doesn't mean that all the details are filled in, but the structure is filled in. And I use the example of a road map. Yesterday, I drove from Holland to Germany. It was 250 kilometers. In order to find the road, I had a map. The map is about 1 meter by 1 meter, so vastly smaller than the 250 kilometers that I was driving. But if the map is a correct map, in this case map, there was a correct map, I ended up perfectly hitting Cologne in the Taunusstraße number 40 after driving 250 kilometers from A to B to C to D, finally ending at the destination. So if the map is an accurate map, if it's a good map, then you can use that map to traverse something and to understand something that is much bigger. It's basically a coded form of reality. And through that code, we can actually understand how reality is structured in the bigger picture. So the Vedic knowledge is like that roadmap. But we have to have the right map. If you have the wrong map, I would probably not be sitting here, but maybe in Vladivostok or in Paris, if I'd used the wrong map. But I used the right map, so I ended up from Amsterdam in Cologne. So Vedic knowledge, therefore, is extremely important because it provides the total picture and gives mankind a direction in the way that we should move, in the way that we should understand the universe, and the way that we should deal with it, and the way that we should live. A very important part of Vedic philosophy is the recognition, of course, that God exists. But what does that imply? If God exists and we are part of God, we are all tiny little spiritual sparks. We are part of that quantum field that was created by Krishna. And we have the same qualities. We are spiritual. We do not have the same quantity. Krishna is infinite. We are finite. But we have the same qualities. So having so knowing that I just got distracted for a moment. Sorry about that. What was the last point I made?
You are the spiritual spark. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I just got distracted for a second. No fault. No problem at all. No, if we recognize that there is a supreme being and we are part of that, we are a soul, and that soul is finite and Krishna is infinite, that automatically explains what is our relationship to Krishna. That relationship is that we are the servant of God. And more important, we are the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of God. That is the essence of spirituality. The essence of spiritual life, the essence of spiritual understanding is that we all recognize that we are a tiny, tiny little part of a much bigger whole, and that we have a role to play in that we are serving that bigger whole. And if we all do that service, then even our personal lives, our society will be very peaceful. If people learn how to serve one another, serve the greater good, serve the supreme being, if everyone has that service mentality and the attitude of humility, we can immediately understand that society will be so much more peaceful. Just imagine if world leaders today, the Putins of this world and the Trumps of this world and other guys, if they would be just a little bit more compassionate, just a little bit more considerate, just a little bit more tolerant, and just a little bit more humble, not trying to create empires or recreate empires, but just accept, okay, I have a little empire, that's fine with me. Let me manage it properly. And you have a little empire, that's fine. Let's work together. That's how human society should function. But it's not happening because it's Kali Yuga. You'll know it's Kali Yuga. It's a bad time. People are inclined to fight. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of quarrel. There's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of ego involved. Everywhere, ego is spoiling everything. One of the essence of Vaishnava teachings is to get rid of that ego, that false ego. Minimize that ego. Understand that you're just a tiny little speck within a very large infinite universe, and that all we can do is just be a humble servant. And if we do that, according to the Vedas, then actually our lives will be very happy. And our society, our communities will be very happy. But in Kali Yuga, that's a very tough thing to accomplish. So I think that the society today is going through a major transition. This knowledge that is now available and that has been hidden in a way for thousands of years. Thanks to Srila Prabhupada that we are able to sit here, that he took the trouble to, at a very elderly age, to travel to the West in very difficult circumstances with a few dollars and no prospects of there being any success. And he did that to bring this knowledge that was previously completely unknown. There were Western scholars, the British, they colonized India. They studied the Hindu culture and the Vedic culture, but they thought it was inferior. They thought Christianity was superior, and kind of Vedic culture being kind of primitive and mythological, with all kinds of gods, with strange, looking like an elephant or looking like a bird or looking with four heads, these kind of weird things. So this kind of mythology, a little bit like the Greek mythology, they didn't understand any of that. These demigods, they are not just fantasies. These demigods are powerful beings like us, not human beings. They are godly beings that have incredible power to help to manage the universe. This universe, like this country, is managed by persons. It's managed by individuals. And so the so things. Um, So it's extremely important to be able to understand these points. It is something that can help us to improve the quality of our life, to improve the quality of our society and our community, and understanding these very fundamental principles about how the universe was created, how it functions, that it did not come about by chaos, but that there is a supreme being that is controlling all of that, and that we are part of that. That is essential information. And as I said, our society is going through a transition. This knowledge was never available. Now it is available. And because of the modern communication media that we have, it's very widely available. I mean, if I go to Google and I look up, you know, any of the bhajans, of the Nishringa bhajan or Arctic, you can find it on Google. I mean, it's pretty amazing. If I want to look any text that Prabhupada spoke, even that I can find in Google. So the information now is available in an incredible way that never happened before. Like I said, the British, they colonized India. They thought it was a primitive religion, so they completely distorted it. And when they communicated this Vedic culture to the West, it looked like a primitive culture. It's not. In fact, it is the most, and I can say that without wanting to sound arrogant, I've spent the last 40 years of my life studying pretty much every religion in the world, every philosophy in the world. I have not found anything that comes close to the Vedanta philosophy, the Vaishnava Vedanta philosophy. And it's really truly a supreme body of knowledge that was never available to the world in Kali Yuga, and that's now become available. And that's why this movement is unique for many, many reasons, but particularly for that reason, that true knowledge has now been able to break through to the wider community, the wider society, and it's available everywhere. So, like we have here in Germany and in many other countries in Europe, we have Hare Krishna temples where this information is made available, where devotees can get together, where people can get together, engaged in practices to achieve that goal of being the servant of the servant, being enlightened, being making spiritual progress. And I mentioned, that we are living in a particular age. It's called Kali Yuga. Uh, who has not heard of Kali Yuga? Who has heard of Kali Yuga? Who knows what Kali Yuga means? Okay. Yeah, I know you know. Kali Yuga is the epoch that we are living in today. It started 5,000 years ago, according to the Vedas. According to the Vedas, that history is cyclical, but they are huge cycles. 4 yugas. We are living in the last yuga. It's called the Iron Age or the Kali Yuga, and it's 432,000 years. So we have already passed 5,000 years, so there's another 427,000 to go. It's not a great prospect, so the whole idea is try to get out as quickly as possible before it gets worse. But there's one unique thing about this Kali Yuga, is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu incarnated in this Kali Yuga, and he gave us a very simple formula for becoming liberated from the material energy. And it's the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. And it's a very simple process. It's a process of yoga. It's a process of enlightenment. It's a process of purification, but it can be practiced basically by anyone. And that's in very, in previous ages and previous yugas when people were stronger, grew much older. You would have to sit on a mountaintop meditating for 100,000 years in order to achieve enlightenment. Today, that would be, first of all, the 100,000 years would be unachievable. We can't even sit down for 10 years or let's say 1 year or even 5 or 10 minutes and be completely peaceful. So, we are very limited, very conditioned. Our physical, mental capabilities are very limited. But we have this very beautiful process of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra in order to achieve that peace of mind to achieve spiritual advancement for yourself and for your family and for your community. And that can spread to the larger community and can be a major impulse for making this world a better place, even though it's Kali Yuga, which usually means it's bad and getting worse and getting even worse and even worse. Now, there is some references in the Vedas that we are entering into a golden age of Kali Yuga that will last 10,000 years, and we started 500 years ago with the advent of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that means that there is a positive development, that this movement is actually a catalyst to make that positive development possible for both individuals to achieve their goal of liberation eventually from the material energy, from the cycle of reincarnation, the cycle of birth and death, and for the larger community to at least learn how to live together peacefully. And that's already in itself is a massive, massive benefit. So thanks again for being here this afternoon. And if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to ask or comment. Yes.
You have to shake the adapter.
Yes.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for giving us a scientific perspective. I was glad that at the end you took the call to a Krishna conscious conclusion, because I got a little astray in between. Simultaneously, I have a question. We are used to that a Big Bang is like, if you say Big Bang, there cannot be a conscious living entity.
Yeah.
This is kind of atheistic point of view. So you mentioned a few times that the scientists, they have proven. So I thought a little, wait a minute, they have proven, but I don't know. Could you explain a little further, because you said Big Bang is proven, but then we have also, you know this better than me, we have this connection. We have Brahma Samhita, Ishvara, Brahma, Krishna. What is the connection?
No, there's no contradiction. It's simply, the Big Bang is simply another word, scientific word for creation. And of course, it implies that it's a chaotic process of creation, but we know, of course, it's not. So that's the difference. But the important thing is that the universe, that we know for a fact that the universe was created at a certain point in time. And even, I think I mentioned that the Pope, when he heard about this discovery of the Big Bang, that became the official kind of scientific view of the origin of the universe, the Pope was excited. I think he wrote a letter congratulating the scientists who discovered it and says, fantastic, we won. So if they saw it as a vindication of religion versus atheism, and that the knowledge that the universe had a beginning was really like a very powerful thing. Of course, in the Bible, it says that God created the earth at a certain point in time. So all religions do accept that the universe was created by God. In fact, all religions, all bona fide religions, they understand that there is God. That's the essence of every religion, whether you call them this name or that name, or whether it's in this culture or that culture. All religions agree on one thing, that there is one supreme being. Now, that supreme being created the universe. Now, in scientific jargon, as I mentioned, initially they called it Big Bang. It was kind of like a sarcastic comment that was made by a scientist called Fred Hoyle. And he was an atheist, and at a certain point, he became converted from atheism to not atheism. He realized that atheism is impossible because of complexity. He discovered that there's incredible complexity, these four forces, the fine-tuning, and he discovered that. It was already discovered, but he recognized it and accepted it. So then he turned from atheism into non-atheism, but he also coined the phrase Big Bang. It's like a joke, sarcastically, because he didn't really believe in it initially. Later on, he accepted it. Now, later on, the Big Bang, that was coined initially as a sarcastic comment, turned into a different concept. Then, especially now, scientists don't call it Big Bang anymore, they call it inflation. The universe had a massive inflation at the beginning point. So inflation sounds already less chaotic than a Big Bang or an explosion. Now, if you add to that, that Krishna was behind it, and it was a controlled process, when Krishna used his expansions, his demigods in order to create his universe, then the whole picture turns. So there's no contradiction there. It's just a different type of use of language.
So that was done by a scientist. He used this as a sarcasm,
Yeah.
but converted. And the whole scientific sampradaya, so to say, they took this up and emphasized this for their own atheistic philosophy and outline of the world.
No,
Is that
scientists,
correct?
no, the atheists were not happy with the Big Bang.
Yes.
Atheists were not happy with the Big Bang. In fact, atheists were very attached to what is called the steady state theory. And the steady state theory basically states that the universe is eternal. Now, that became a problem because Einstein also discovered, and Newton discovered the law of gravity, and Einstein later on refined that law of gravity by saying that it was a curvature of time-space, the time-space continuum, which is basically the same as the quantum field. And when you have mass in it, that presses against the field, and then there's a reaction that we experience as gravity. That was his explanation. So, but the problem with gravity is that it only pulls in one direction. So if the universe is eternal, and there's only one force working at it, pulling it all together, then at a certain point, the whole thing will implode. The universe could not be eternal in that. So Einstein said, wait a minute, I have a problem. According to my own law, my own theory, this universe cannot be eternal because of gravity. So then he came up with an explanation and a solution for that. It's called the cosmological principle, which implies that during the implosion, there were other forces that would keep the whole thing stable. So at the same rate that gravity would pull it together, there was another force that was kind of keeping it stable so that it would not implode. Now, later on, that cosmological constant was discovered to be what we now call dark energy. And in fact, dark energy is the opposite of gravity because dark energy pushes the whole universe apart. And this is what Hubble discovered in the 1920s, that the universe is in fact expanding. And it's because of that expansion, they had to come to the conclusion that it started from the beginning at one point. Because if something is expanding and you go back in time, you'll see it's contracting. And when something keeps on contracting, you end up at one point, and that's the singularity, and that's the point where the Big Bang emerged. So again, it's a matter of semantics, but fundamentally, most atheists were not happy with the Big Bang. They preferred the steady state because the steady state also makes it possible, this idea that you have infinite amount of time for atoms to bump together, you know, the typing monkeys, so to speak. You know, the typing monkeys can only work if the universe is infinite in time, if it's eternal. But if it's limited in time, then forget about all the monkeys. You can forget about them anyway, but in that example, it doesn't work at all. You need eternal time if you want to make the atheistic point of view giving even a slight chance of succeeding. If you don't have eternal time, if you have 13.7 billion years, then nothing works. Even evolution, Darwinian evolution, as I was pointing out, could not work because it's too complex. You don't have the time to have this complexity work out by chance. Does that explain your question?
Well, I have to think about it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I thought we always say Balaram is in charge of gravity, isn't it? We ever say?
Sure. In the end, all the forces are controlled by individuals, by conscious beings. Now, when we explain this to scientists, we don't necessarily have to go specifically into, you know, Balaram and Garbhodakshay Vishnu and so on. That's the next stage. Let's first get them to accept that the universe had a beginning, And that beginning must have been an intelligent incident. It must have been created by consciousness and intelligence, and it did not happen by accident. That's the important thing. Yes.
When the energies expand, thank you very much. So when the energies are being expanded, they separate from each other, or they are somehow stay in some relationships with each other.
I don't understand your question. Could you repeat
So
that?
you said that the energies, they are expanding. The process of expanding.
The universe is expanding.
Yeah, and the energies also they expanding.
Yeah.
Yes. While this process of expanding, the energies are being separated from each other. They separate, they expanding, they separate, or there is something else. They are coming into each other, some relationships, or they're separated, separate energies. What is it?
No, it's basically space is expanding. And space includes energy. Space is energy. So simply, space is expanding, energy is expanding, Krishna is expanding. Because basically, Krishna is infinite. And when you're dealing with infinity, you have infinity plus infinities, infinity times infinities, infinity minus infinity, still infinity. So when you're dealing with infinite realities, the dynamics completely change. And in fact, they become incomprehensible, inconceivable. It's called, in Sanskrit, it's called achintya. So the inconceivable nature of Krishna, one of the aspects of his inconceivable nature, one is that he is simultaneously one and different. It's called achintya veda veda tattva. But the other one is that he's infinite. Infinity is just incomprehensible because we are fundamentally finite. So therefore we can qualitatively understand, but not quantitatively understand it. That's the difference.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So as an idea, Prabhu, you told us that there is no contradiction between the Vedic knowledge and the modern science. But I cannot understand this. Why? Yeah, because the Big Bang was just for 14 billion years, 14 milliard. No? But we know that just the day of Brahma is
4.3 billion. 4.3 billion.
trillion.
Trillion, yeah.
Yes, a trillion, and 1 trillion is 1,000 times more than 1 billion.
Yeah.
So it means that, according to the books that I'm reading, it's not possible that universe will exist just 14 billion years. It's just 1 second for Brahma. So how we cannot deny this? So
no, I'm not denying that. I'm also not saying that necessarily the 13.7 billion is something that is carved in stone and is the absolute truth. Because 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, they thought when Hubble first discovered the expansion of the universe, they made different calculations. And initially they thought it was like 3 billion, then it became 5 billion, then it became 10 billion, and then it became 13.7 billion. So now there's the James Webb telescope, which is the latest incredibly technological gadget that scientists are using to measure, galaxies and measure the universe. Now they have discovered galaxies that are so nearby that it could not possibly be within that 30.7 billion years. And some scientists are saying, no, it's double the amount. So it's 26 point whatever billion. So it's not, these numbers is not what is crucial. We know it's a huge number, but it's 20 billion, 10 billion, 13.7 billion. From our perspective, that is not relevant. Our perspective is that it had a beginning, and that beginning was created by an intelligent agent. That is the conclusion that's really important. Now, the exact mechanics of it, the exact time frame, scientists make guesses all the time, and they come up from time to time with different answers based on better calculations, better computers, more powerful machines. They discover new things. But it's not the quantity, it's the quality that's important. The quality is that the universe had a beginning and that it was created by, must have been created by an intelligent agent. That is what is important.
And so when we cannot trust the values that the scientists are telling us, if it's 10 billion or 20 or 70 years, just as I'm told, why should we just think about that? Why should we respect this opinion? So that because we see that all the society that we see on the outside, all this as a modern science does not help people. So we have as created the cars, but we have as polluted our planet. What is the goal of this science?
Well, you can certainly criticize for a lot of things. You can criticize the Industrial Revolution that created a lot of dirt and created a lot of very dirty technology and polluted the environment. But on the other hand, you can say the Industrial Revolution has also lifted our life expectancy. It has lifted the standard of living for millions and millions of people. Today, from a purely materialistic perspective, we have never been as wealthy and as rich, the whole planet, Earth, 8 billion people, as ever before in history. So nothing is perfect. And science is not perfect and technology is not perfect. What we do see, and that's a positive thing, that we learn more and more how to be very efficient and productive without polluting. You know, that's why we have this whole movement towards renewable energy, for instance, which is less polluting. I'm not saying it's totally non-polluting. Even electric cars, they pollute to some extent, and even windmills, they pollute to some extent. So nothing is absolutely perfect. But there's an important saying: don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. And that's a saying that is, I would say, more applicable today in today's society, where everyone is kind of totally extremist, that if this doesn't work, then it's like all or nothing. No, if this doesn't work, then try to maybe something else, maybe not quite as perfect in terms of your goals, but still something that could be very good. I'll give another example. In the 20th century, we've seen the battle between communism and capitalism. The communists, the Soviet Union, they said, we have the workers' paradise, we have the perfect solution how to organize society. And the Americans, being the capitalists, we have the best, the free market will solve everything. Now we know that both extremists' point of view don't work. Pure capitalism doesn't work. We've seen, before, in the 1930s, the previous century, how the Great Depression for 10 years, more than 10 years, completely destroyed the world economy. That's why communism became very popular in the 1930s, because they could point to the capitalist world and see it's a mess. The whole capitalist world is in a big depression. But the communist system was in a perpetual depression. The only way that Stalin was able to build this huge industrial kind of basis is because of slave labor. The Soviet Union, they just took people off the street, and millions of them were put into gulags and work camps. Yeah, then you can certainly build an industrial base for your economy, but don't ask about all the misery and the suffering that you're creating. So the pure communist system doesn't work, the pure capitalist system doesn't work. So what did we find out? Yeah, somewhere in between. And society where there is a free market, where people are entrepreneurs and work hard to make money, but there's a government that will regulate it and control it so that it doesn't become excessive, that we don't have fraud, and that we don't have abuse, and that we don't have all kinds of forces that are interfering with the proper functioning of our economy and society. So it's a matter of the balance between the two. Some central control of the government, some part of free market and individual freedom. And if that is properly balanced, and in fact, this is one of the examples I always use about Achintya Veda Veda Tattva, because that's exactly what Achintya Veda Veda Tattva is. It's the balance, because in the center, that's where things happen. Even in politics, you can see that. When a country becomes kind of centrist, and when the extremes become irrelevant, and you have a little bit center left and a little bit center right, and they have a centrist party and they work together, that's when you get efficient government. But when people become extremist on the left or on the right, it destroys everything. And we see this extremism now happening all over the world. I mean, Again, the look in America, the look in some other countries as well. The extreme right, particularly, is very, very vocal, very active, and it's destructive. We need to be having a balance in the center. Extremism never works. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Try to find the best possible solution. The same applies to our Krishna conscious movement. You know, we're a movement. We have an organization, we have people running it. It's not perfect. We all also make mistakes as human beings. We try for perfection. We try to be the best possible devotee. We try to be the best possible servant. We try to be the best possible manager of whatever you're managing. But at the same time, we know we're going to make mistakes. But it doesn't mean you should stop trying. If something doesn't work, try something else, or improve it, or tweak it, make it better. So this is crucial. And that's practical. That counts for our movement too. Srila Prabhupada used to say, utility is the principle. What does utility mean? Utility means pragmatic. It means don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you find a solution which you think is perfect but doesn't work, then try something which is maybe not perfect, but at least it's good enough. So that applies to society in general, but it also applies to a spiritual organization like ours.
We have time?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have some.
Yeah.
So actually, I want to just correct one information. Krishna? Yes. So the day of the Brahma, we were discussing, we are not going to details of numbers. So it's not in trillion, it's still in billion. So it's 4.32 billion. One day of Brahma. When it comes to life of the Brahma, like 100 years of the Brahma, then it is 311 trillion years. So, but Prabhu, I have one small thing, like the Earth, the life of Earth is also nearly 4 billion or 4.5 billion or something.
Yeah.
And this matches with the life of like one day of Brahma somehow.
Yeah. No, I did make the calculation, and according to the Vedic calendar,
Yes.
and looking at the life of Brahma, it would be approximately 5 billion years, according to the calculation. And so you can calculate it if you take all the manus and you take all the, there are different steps to calculate it. It's all laid out in the Veda. So it's pretty close to what scientists are saying. And again, the difference between 5 billion or 13 billion, it's 8 billion, so it's a lot. But it's not the quantitative issue here that matters, it's the qualitative issue that matters. The universe was created at a certain point, and that creator was an intelligent being. That's the thing that matters.
Thank you so much.
I'm totally interested in when you speak to scientists, which I assume you often do.
Yes.
I guess so. Is it that they always find escape ways? The famous escape ways, not to go the bhakti path. How do you connect this?
Yeah. No, I can tell you what the big escape is for scientists or for atheists, because this cosmic fine-tuning that I've been talking about, that was a big blow to atheism. Even Richard Dawkins had to admit that this is something, whoa, we didn't expect this. Now, what is the solution? They created the multiverse. So these four forces happen to have the exact right values, but they say, yeah, that happened to be just in our universe. We were lucky that we just happened to be in the right universe. But there are trillions, there are infinite number of universes, multiverse. And they all fail basically. They either become a big hole, or they just explode, or they exist for a few seconds and they implode again. But we happen to be in that one universe. We the lucky ones to happen to be in that one universe that works, where all the four forces are exactly the right number, so that molecules, atoms can exist, that life can exist, that you and I can exist. We're lucky. But the problem with the multiverse theory, first of all, it is scientifically completely impossible to verify, because according to the multiverse theory, every universe exists in a completely different dimension. in a different time-space continuum. We are not even connected to them in any way whatsoever. So as far as we can say, they don't exist. If something is completely different, basically totally different from anything that we know, and it has no connection to any of the laws of nature that we have, including the existence of matter, of energy, the existence of forces. If none of these things exist, you're talking about something that is so non-existent that literally means it doesn't exist. If the universe, these multiverses, if they do exist, in fact, they are automatically connected, because the definition of universe is that it includes everything. Now, you can divide that everything into compartmentalized parts and create sub-universes. That's possible, but they would still be subject to the same laws. And the most important law is the law of entropy. We haven't talked about that, but the law of entropy is the one that basically stipulates that everything that's complex will automatically disintegrate into something simple. So that's why you need another force to counteract entropy, because entropy is the destructive force of the universe. It basically says that anything that starts complex will automatically deteriorate into something that is simpler and not complex. It will fall apart. So the law of entropy is a law that rules all existence, all existing things. So if you have another universe that may be disconnected from our universe, it would still be subjected to the law of entropy. So this cop-out by atheists, unfortunately for them, does not work. But still, they are hanging on to it. They say, well, it might work. And, you know, to accept that God exists is just so totally unacceptable. It's so outrageous. It's so ridiculous. I mean, there's no way that we can accept it. So we're going to stick to the multiverse and we're going to defend it like hell.
And just to get a better picture, when you, let's say you meet with, let's call them poor souls.
Call them what?
Poor souls. I mean, the scientists, you know, defending their multiverse.
They're offending their,
you know,
right, yeah.
I mean, how do you get in as a devotee? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you know, we say give them some prashadam, you know.
Yeah. Well,
are the good guys.
Yeah, yeah. Now, look, I mean, if you want to debate scientific and philosophical arguments, then you have to enter the realm of scientific and philosophical arguments. So you have to speak their language. If you just say, okay, take prasadam, chant Hare Krishna, then that's the end of the discussion. So the whole point is, you know, as Srila Prabhupada said many times, he wants this Krishna conscious movement to be able to reach out to everybody, including the scientific community. In fact, specifically the scientific community, because science has become such a powerful force in society today. Science is practically the new religion, except that science is also, you know, it's not like religions always claim to be perfect. Scientists do accept that they do make occasionally a mistake, right? So they are so-called realistic, they're so-called unbiased, they're so-called objective, they're willing to admit mistakes, which is true to some extent, but in many cases it's not true. Sometimes it takes a big shock before it's discovered that a scientist is making a big mistake. And that happens. Now, I'll give you an example. In the early 20th century, there was a discovery regarding the evolution theory. This is called the Piltdown man. And one guy discovered what was called the missing link, you know, because the whole thing about evolution, you need all these transit. When a species is evolving from, let's say, a monkey to a human being, you need all the intermediary. According to evolution theory, you need all the intermediary steps in order to get there. So this guy, the scientist, so-called, an archaeologist, he dug up some bones and, we discovered it, you know, and he put it all together. And it looked like a missing link, like in between a man and a monkey kind of thing. And then they discovered that the whole thing was a hoax. That the guy put all the bones together, he put the whole thing together. But this happened for years and years, and this was being taught in schools and universities. The proof of evolution. You know, the same about proof of evolution is the creation of life. There was an experiment that was done. It's a famous experiment. I forgot the name of the scientist. It's very famous. They put some things in, I think it was in the 1950s, they put things in a test tube and they bombarded it with electricity and other stuff. And they saw some amino acids emerge. And they said, this is the proof. And then they discovered, of course, this, first of all, the amino acids, they never came about because the test was executed in the wrong way. And then they said, well, and one amino acid, you need, billions of other transactions to make life actually happen. This is one of the biggest problems, evolution. Even Darwin acknowledged that. They have never seen in real life or in a laboratory that a dead piece of matter was being able to migrate into a living something, just one living cell. They have never been able to create it. And we know exactly what are the components of a living cell. The chemicals that are making up the cell are completely known. They're part of the periodic table. We know what they are. We know even their structures. We can, even with computers, we can emulate their structures. So you would imagine if you have all that knowledge, you would be able to create a living cell. No, there's one ingredient which is missing. It's life. As Prabhupada would say, life comes from life. And that's really fundamentally very true. That life force, it gives consciousness and vitality, which is the symptom of all living things. That life force can never be created in a laboratory. It's not a mixture of chemicals. There's another force. It's called spirit that's required. So, look, there have been many mistakes made. And sometimes scientists have a rough wakening up when they are exposed, when they are fraudsters, for instance. But most scientists are not fraudsters. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to find conclusions that can help, that can deepen our understanding of reality. But does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I just felt I wanted to have a picture where you tell, yeah, there was this nice guy, and he asked, where is the temple, You explained it so nicely and we're on the same page, I agree there's a control. What is this with this Vedas? And you said, tell them, yeah, come to the Hare Krishna temple. And,
yeah.
He dances in kirtan.
Well, I've to be honest, I've done it many times. And I've had many, I've had many discussions with people that were skeptic, maybe not necessarily convinced atheists, but they were very cynical, very skeptical, and I had some, long discussions, and they became devotees. That happened, and I had the fortune of being able to be part of that and to be an instrument in that. But it doesn't always happen. Some people are really stubborn. Look, the material world is full of different kinds of souls. There are souls on the way up, and there are souls on the way down. And Bhagavad Gita also explains that. So not everyone wants to leave the material world. There's people that are actually content staying here, birth after birth. It's hard to understand why they could be content, but yet it's the case. Now, we are the different, most devotees that I know, they are pretty convinced about the fact that they want to get out of the material world. That's their big driving force, is that we don't want to be here. Lifetime after lifetime, birth after birth. Having to go through the suffering of the material world, as Srila Prabhupada always said. The material world, basically, you can sugarcoat it, you can make it, turn it into an exciting movie or a theater drama, but fundamentally, it's birth, death, disease, and old age. That's the reality. And also, I must say, when I first met Srila Prabhupada and his teachings and the devotees, I was already into Indian philosophy very much. I was practicing yoga and I was becoming vegetarian. But I was a Mayavadi. Mayavadi, I had adopted the Mayavadi point of view. And so when, and one of the key things that turned me from a Mayavadi into a non-Mayavadi is the fact that the Mayavadis say that all the suffering that you're in, it's just an illusion. It doesn't really exist. And of course, suffering is not an illusion. It may be temporary, but it's still, when you have it, it's really painful, depending what kind of suffering it is. And for me, that was the thing. The Mayavadis say, yeah, but we are God. But how can I be God if I'm here in this world? and we are suffering, and there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, if you're God, you're all powerful. You can prevent that from happening. You just don't do it, right? You have that power. So obviously, I'm not God. Then there must be another explanation. Now, and the other explanation I could not find. There was no other philosopher. There was no other teacher. There was no other guru that was teaching Vaishnava philosophy until I met the devotees who explained, hey, wait a minute, you're not God, you're a servant of God. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, but why am I here then? Because you were a little bit jealous of God. You wanted to be a little bit like God. You wanted to be a creator. You wanted to be a godlike figure that has the power to create. And so that explanation, I told that story yesterday. The first time I was visiting the temple already, but one time I attended a lecture from one devotee called Yogeshwar, and he gave this example. He said, imagine a mother cooking in the kitchen, and her little daughter, 3 years old, sees the mother cooking. She gets very excited. She also wants to cook, but obviously she cannot cook. It's too dangerous. She doesn't know how. So she gives the little child a toy kitchen. That is Krishna giving us the material world, the toy kitchen. So we can toy around, we can fool around and play around and think that this is a real kitchen and thinking that this is a real cooking operation, whereas of course it's not. So he is basically satisfying our desire, which is impossible to satisfy, because there's no way that in the end we can become God. That's impossible. Fundamentally, eternally impossible. So once you accept that, of course, then that's the beginning of liberation. But when you desire to have that which Krishna has, and so you get into the mother giving the toy kitchen, which is a very benign example, because the toy kitchen is still a fun thing to do. Basically, usually we don't talk about the material world as being a toy kitchen and a fun thing to do. Basically, we talk about the material world as something that's kind of hellish, a kind of place you don't want to be, especially in Kali Yuga. So this example, when I heard that lecture from the Yogeshwar, from that moment, I decided to, yes, Krishna consciousness is it. This philosophy of Vaishnavism is it. That's the moment I was like an aha, awakeness, or a moment, transformational moment. But the next day I joined the temple because of that explanation. And no other explanation like that had ever been provided before, which is remarkable if you think about it. Today, devotees all around the world are constantly giving that example in different ways. So in those days, it was not there. All the gurus that came from India to the West, they were all Mayavadis, all saying the same thing. We've got, just forgotten about it, just meditate, and then you realize that the whole thing is just an illusion, and then once you recognize, you become enlightened, and this will all be gone, and you become God again. So, powerful statement, but it's not true. So even gurus and yogis can be wrong, like scientists can be wrong. So we need the right roadmap, and not a roadmap that shows us that we're going to go into becoming God, or a roadmap that shows that, the whole universe came out of a big explosion in total chaos. We don't need those kind of roadmaps. The Vedic roadmap is very accurate. And if you follow that roadmap, then you can get a tremendous amount of benefit from it, because it works. Things that work.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. So thank you very much, Prabhu, for this really, really wonderful, enlightening talk. Actually, this topic is very, very complex topic and very deep topic. And this is the greatness of Prabhu, that because he has read the various philosophies and all the scientific principles, he has a very, very thorough understanding of that. Because our audience is very, very wide audience, very general audience, and this kind of subject matters very difficult to discuss in a very wide range of audience. but still he has made it so nicely. He has presented the whole perspective, and yeah, and we are very happy that there are so many questions, and so many questions means that there are so many interest among the audience, among the participants, and I know many of you have still questions, and Prabhuji is still here. We will have Gaura Arti now, and after Gaura Arti we have Narasimha Arti, then we will have Prasadam. So Prabhuji is still here, and Prabhuji, we would like to once again announce this book. If you we can show this, yes. So this is a very, very wonderful book. I'm also reading this book for last few months, and yeah, I found it very interesting. And this book is about intelligent cows, very, very nice understanding about the scientific principles. And we have had Achintya away in the scientific material science also. So I will recommend that we can have such a book also. At the reception, there are many copies, and today Prabhuji can himself sign it and bless the owner of the book that he gave the blessings to understand the book. So thank you very much, and thank you, Prabhu, that you have given us such a time for yesterday. Prabhuji arrived yesterday, and he has delivered this seminar in 3 parts. Many of us attended only today, so many of the fundamentals were read in the last 2 days. But we will request Prabhu that please visit us again and bless us again with this wonderful knowledge and deep wisdom. And you are truly, yeah, it was the vision of Srila Prabhupada that this Krishna consciousness should be pleased to the scientific community, also to the science, and you are making the vision of the Srila Prabhupada true. So thank you very much again, and we should now pray for more spiritual strength and more energy for Prabhu that he can preach this science to more and more audience, more and more people, and make their life successful. And we should chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra for Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. More from the heart. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. This is Sri Krishna Prabhu ki Jai. Bhakti Swami Maharaj ki Jai. Sri Prabhupada ki Jai. So now we go for the Gaura Arti.